In West Virginia, long-haul truckers still whisper about a strange shortcut. They call it Route 19 Alternate. On a GPS screen, it shows up as clearly as any other highway, a path that promises to shave off over half an hour of drive time, cutting nearly 40 miles from the trip. For anyone hauling freight at night, saving even 30 minutes can mean the difference between making your delivery on time or paying heavy penalties. And that's exactly why so many drivers have tried taking it. Some say it's real perfectly paved asphalt, green highway signs built to federal standards, and a wide, smooth surface that looks like it was designed specifically for 18-wheelers. But others, after saying they'd take that shortcut, they never arrived at their destination. Sometimes, when I'm sitting alone in my cab after midnight, CB radio tuned to channel 19, with static crackling in the background, I hear voices echoing as if they're rising up from deep underground. Jake Morrison, your shift starts in 1 hour. I was born into a family where the sound of diesel engines was practically in our blood. 3 generations of Morrisons have run loads through the Appalachian Mountains, hauling freight across every winding mile from Virginia to Alabama. My father used to tell me, the road is our home, and the wheel is the staff we pass down. Before him, my grandfather spent his youth on these same routes. And now, it's my turn, carrying on the craft my family has held on to for decades. After 20 years, I can say with certainty, I know every curve, every grade, every truck stop better than most people know their own neighborhoods. I don't need a screen to tell me where I'm going. The map is in my head, accurate like a living GPS. I know which roads can handle a fully loaded rig, which ones have low bridges, and which stretches turn into mud traps the moment the rain pours down. For me, this isn't just a job, it's pride. It's the Morrison legacy, something I once believed I'd carry until the day I hung up my keys for good. That night, I was hauling a load of furniture from a factory in North Carolina to a big warehouse in Columbus, Ohio. It was a run I'd done more than 50 times in my career, so familiar I could almost drive it with my eyes closed. But this trip didn't start smooth. The factory delayed the load, and I rolled out nearly 3 hours late. In trucking, 3 hours is a nightmare. It can mean late fees, damaged reputation, and sometimes even losing a contract altogether. I did the math. If I kept a steady speed and didn't run into trouble, I could make it all the way to a truck stop just outside Charleston. There, I could catch a few hours of sleep in my cab before finishing the last stretch in the morning to hit my delivery on time. By then, it was close to midnight. The highway was nearly empty, only the occasional taillights of passenger cars flashing by in the opposite direction. I flipped on my CB radio, set it to channel 19, and listened to the scattered chatter of other night drivers. The dashboard cast a faint bluish glow across the cab. The engine rumbled steadily beneath me, and all I had ahead was a long stretch of dark, silent road. What I didn't know was that this late start would put me face to face with a detour I never could have imagined in my lifetime. Just as I was holding the wheel steady on that empty stretch, my GPS gave off its familiar ding, followed by the flat, mechanical voice of the system. In 2 miles, turn right to Route 19 Alternate. This route will save you 42 miles and nearly 40 minutes of driving. I frowned instantly. 20 years of running these mountains back and forth, and not once had I ever heard of Route 19 Alternate. On the screen, the road cut straight through terrain I knew by heart, skipping Charleston completely and connecting almost directly to the Ohio border. My chest tightened for a second. On instinct, I reached into the side pocket and pulled out the old, worn paper atlas my father had given me when I first started trucking. The contour lines told me everything. Steep ridges, wild forests, no highways, no towns, just untouched wilderness. I clicked my tongue and shook my head. No way. But my eyes stayed glued to the GPS screen, where that glowing line stretched across the mountains like a shortcut too good to ignore. And sure enough, 2 miles later, the turn appeared. To my right was a road that looked brand new. My headlights swept across flawless blacktop, bright white lane markings still shining as if they'd been painted that morning. Not a single crack, not a single pothole. A green highway sign stood tall, the white letters bold and sharp. Route 19, Columbus 127 miles. A chill crawled up my spine. The road looked like it had been laid within the past year, but there were no signs of construction. No cones, no heavy equipment left behind. Not even one orange detour sign. The silence around me was absolute. The turnoff looked so perfect, it didn't even feel real. I gripped the wheel tighter, hesitated for a second, and then, as if something unseen was urging me on, my 18-wheeler slowly rolled onto the new highway. As soon as my tires rolled fully onto the new pavement, I expected to see the glow of another truck's taillights up ahead. Maybe some smart driver who had already discovered this golden road before me. But in front of me, there was nothing. Just solid darkness stretching out forever. I glanced into my mirrors. Not a single headlight followed. Both directions were completely empty, as if this entire stretch of highway had been opened for me alone. My grip on the wheel tightened. A cold unease crept up my chest. In this business, any route that saves 42 miles would instantly become a lifeline. Within weeks, it would be flooded with 18-wheelers from all over. Yet here, there wasn't a single vehicle in sight. The cab was silent, except for the steady growl of the engine beneath my feet. I tried to calm myself. Maybe the road's too new. Maybe no one knows about it yet. But deep down, I felt that something wasn't right ahead. And then, the strangeness deepened. The road itself was flawless, almost as if it had been drawn up by engineers who understood trucking better than anyone. The curves bent just enough to be smooth, never sharp, like they'd been carved to flow perfectly with the mountains. The grades were uncanny, never steep enough to strain a fully loaded rig pushing close to 80,000 pounds. My headlights swept across the shoulders, revealing wide emergency pull-offs, spaced every few miles. There were even designated slow vehicle lanes, the kind you only see on major federal interstates. Every detail of this highway was perfect, too perfect. I couldn't help but think, if someone designed a road solely for long-haul truckers, it would look exactly like this. But in the real world, no road is ever built just to cater to drivers like me. That thought alone made the perfection feel unnatural. A few more miles in, my beams caught something odd along the roadside. At first, I thought it was nothing unusual, just old mining equipment left to rot, a rusted conveyor belt, a couple of abandoned coal cars, tangled in weeds. In West Virginia, that's not rare. The Appalachians are littered with relics of the coal industry, but then I started noticing things that didn't fit. Scattered among the broken frames, eaten through with decades of rust, were bright yellow excavators, their paint still gleaming like they'd just been delivered from the factory. A massive bulldozer stood nearby, its manufacturer's decal still crisp and unweathered. All of it old and new sat jumbled together, as if decades of mining operations had been abandoned in the very same place, overlapping in time. The sight of it sent a chill straight down my spine. No active mine would ever leave brand new machinery just sitting out to rust. And there was absolutely no reason why equipment from decades apart, sometimes half a century, would all end up abandoned in the same spot. Somehow, this road was pulling me through a place where time no longer felt linear. Around mile 15, my CB radio suddenly erupted with harsh static. Crackles and pops, mixed with faint voices, like someone had pressed play on an old recording from generations ago. I twisted the dial, trying to clear the channel, but the interference didn't fade. Instead, the voices grew stronger, raspy, distorted, but unmistakably clear. They weren't truckers on Channel 19. The tone was different. These were coal miners' voices. Number 4. Night shifts still running steady. Coal prices dropped this week. Keep the output up, boys. They were talking about shifts in production, using words I'd only ever heard in my grandfather's stories about the 1,950 seconds. Then, one voice cut through the noise louder, sharper, like it was aimed directly at me. Tell Morrison to be ready for the morning shift. My hands locked around the steering wheel, knuckles turning white. Morrison, that was my name. But my family had never worked the mines. We were truckers, always had been. So why, on this strange frequency in the middle of the night, was someone calling out my exact name? A freezing current ran the length of my spine. That's when it hit me. This radio wasn't just picking up signals from the present. It was dragging me back to another time, a time I didn't belong to. I turned my eyes to the roadside, scanning for the mile markers. But instead of counting upward like every highway I'd ever driven, the numbers made my heart pound. Mile 47. A mile later, mile 46. Then, mile 45. The markers were counting down. I gripped the wheel so tightly my arms ached. On every road I'd ever driven, mile markers increased from the starting point toward the state line or the highway's end. But here, the numbers were falling backward, like I wasn't driving away from somewhere, but being pulled deeper, mile by mile, toward some fixed endpoint waiting ahead. I wasn't heading toward Columbus anymore. The feeling was undeniable. This road was pulling me into somewhere else, a place I had never seen on any map. I cracked the window and drew in a breath of damp, cold air that spilled into the cab. The landscape outside pressed down on me, heavy and suffocating. The mountains didn't line up with my memory. The ridgelines were unfamiliar. Nothing like the curves of West Virginia I'd driven thousands of times before. On either side, valleys plunged so deep my headlights could barely cut a few dozen yards into the blackness before being swallowed whole. The farther I went, the more it felt like I'd crossed into a parallel world. Forests loomed with trees that stretched skyward, trunks thick as utility poles, their crowns blotting out the stars. Everything about them felt primal, untouched, like I had wandered into land where no human had ever set foot. In the rearview mirror, the road behind me was already gone, just pure blackness, vanishing almost instantly. That's when the truth hit me hard. There was no turning back. The static on my CB radio suddenly cut out, replaced by a sharp, commanding voice, like an emergency dispatcher shouting orders. Emergency. Cave in at the Morrison site. Repeat. Cave in at the Morrison site. All units respond immediately. I froze. Morrison, that was my name, but no one in my family had ever worked the mines. We were truckers, not miners. Another voice broke in, clear as if it was whispering from the passenger seat right beside me. How many are trapped? 12 men. The entire crew of Jake Morrison on the night shift. My hands trembled on the wheel. My chest pounded with every beat, echoing through my ribs. How could that be? I had never led any mining crew in my life. I was just a driver, trying to deliver furniture to Columbus. And yet, over the radio waves, my name was being spoken as if I was already part of a disaster written decades ago. As my rig rounded a long curve, my headlights swept across a vast valley below. What I saw made my breath catch in my throat, something that simply could not exist. Spread across the darkness was a full-scale mining operation, lit up under dozens of industrial floodlights. The harsh white beams illuminated conveyor belts in motion, massive machines roaring as they worked, and the silhouettes of miners moving with the rhythm of a normal shift. My jaw dropped. According to every map I'd ever studied, this entire area had been shut down years ago when the coal ran out. In West Virginia, mines like this usually ended up as nothing more than piles of rusted steel and cracked concrete foundations. So how, in the middle of the night, was I staring at a mining site blazing with lights, running as if it had never stopped? It felt like my wheels were rolling straight into a pocket of history somewhere the past and present overlapped, bleeding into each other, and I no longer knew what point in time I was standing in. The road sloped downward, pulling me toward the site. I slammed the brakes, but the pedal went soft under my foot, almost useless. My fully loaded rig barreled down the grade as if dragged by some unseen force. The moment my tires hit level ground, my headlights swept across a massive parking lot. And that's when I realized the real nightmare wasn't just the glowing mine in the distance. The lot was packed tight with hundreds of pickup trucks and work vehicles. Some were brand new Ford Phone 152nds and Chevy Silverados, their paint glossy, like they'd just been driven off a dealership lot. Right beside them sat trucks from the 1982nds, paint faded, panels spotted with rust. Farther back were boxy models from the 1972nds, the kind of shapes I barely remembered seeing as a kid. And tucked away in the shadows were massive work trucks from the 1952nds, big steel bodies, curved windshields, tiny side mirrors, vehicles that belonged in a museum, not in an active work site. All of them, from the modern to the antique, stood together, neatly parked, as if each one had carried its driver here and been left behind forever. My rig kept rolling, brakes completely gone. All I could do was clamp the wheel, praying I wouldn't plow straight into the sea of abandoned vehicles. Finally, with a jolt, my truck shuddered to a stop at the edge of the lot. And that's when I saw them, the miners. Groups of men shuffled out of the mine entrance, their steps slow and heavy, the kind of weary gait that only comes after 8 hours underground. My headlights swept over them hundreds of figures, and in that instant, I noticed something deeply wrong. Some wore modern safety gear. hard hats with LED lamps, reflective vests, steel-toed boots still shining like new. But just a few steps away, others were dressed in clothing from another era. Canvas work shirts frayed at the edges, leather boots worn smooth, cloth caps with carbide lamps strapped to the front. They stood side by side, generations of miners blending together, a scene that defied every law of time and logic. In that moment, my chest turned cold. I realized I wasn't just witnessing one group of miners finishing their shift. I was staring at the convergence of entire decades at once. Generations who had worked in the darkness of the mountains, all gathered here together. I squinted, trying to make out the faces stepping from the shadows into the harsh glow of the floodlights. My heart skipped a beat. Among them were faces I knew too well. There was my father, his thin face, deep-set eyes, and stern expression exactly as I remembered from childhood. But instead of a driver's jacket, he wore 1,960 seconds miner's gear. Just behind him, I saw my grandfather, the man who passed away when I was 12. He looked the same as in the old photos. Tall, lean, streaks of gray in his hair, those cold blue eyes staring through me. And, farther back, I recognized my great-grandfather, a man I had never met in life but had seen in the faded sepia pictures tucked in our family album. The entire Morrison bloodline stood before me, yet not a single one wore the clothes of a trucker. They were all miners. Then, from the center of the crowd, a figure stepped forward. He wore a hard hat with Foreman stenciled across the front. When he lifted his face into the light, my hands nearly slipped from the wheel. That man was me. He stopped right outside my cab window, leaned down, and tapped the glass lightly, signaling me to roll it down. When the window slid open, I heard my own voice come out of his mouth. "You're late for your shift, Jake. The crew's been waiting. It is not no, and we do that may be afraid." I swallowed hard, struggling to steady my voice. "No, you've got it wrong," I stammered. Even to my own ears, I sounded shaky. "I'm a truck driver. I'm just trying to make it to Columbus." The other me smiled, and the sight chilled me to the bone. It was the same smile I'd seen reflected in mirrors 1,000 times. "No, Jake. Morrisons don't drive trucks. We work the mines. Always have. Always will." Behind him, dozens of eyes, the faces of Morrison men, spanning generations, fixed on me with patience and certainty. In that instant, I felt my very blood being pulled backward, tethered to a legacy I had never chosen, but one that seemed impossible to escape. In that instant, all the pieces finally snapped together. The brand new road, the mile markers counting backward, the mining equipment from different eras, the old voices crackling through my CB radio, all of it pointed to one undeniable truth. Route 19. Alternate wasn't a shortcut. It was a trap, a road that shouldn't exist, built for one purpose only: to draw in the men of the Morrison family. Generation after generation had been lured here, one by one, and never came back. I looked around the parking lot, the shiny new pickups, sitting side by side with trucks from the 1,950 seconds, and it hit me. Every vehicle belonged to someone from the past, a driver who had followed the call and stepped out, only to join an endless shift deep in the mine. This road didn't just steal time, it stole lives. I sucked in a deep breath and reached for the emergency compartment beside my seat. Inside was the kit every professional driver carries: highway flares. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the first one, but I managed to twist the cap. Shh! A flare burst to life, blazing red, flooding the cab with harsh, blood-colored light. The miners around me staggered back, raising their hands against the glow. Figures that had looked solid moments ago began to flicker and blur, like mirages wavering in desert heat. The face of the man who looked exactly like me twisted and warped under the crimson fire, both familiar and alien, melting into something I could barely recognize. I snapped 2 more flares and hurled them onto the pavement in front of my rig. Fire erupted, acrid smoke rolling outward, pushing the crowd of miners further back into the shadows. Amid the crackle and hiss of burning flares, one voice rose above the rest, low, gravelly, but crystal clear. "He's not ready. Let him go. He'll come back." My legs were shaking, but my instincts screamed at me. This was my one chance to escape. I slammed the accelerator, knuckles white as I clutched the wheel, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it would tear out of my chest. The engine roared this time, The wheels obeyed. The cab rattled violently as I floored it, backing away from the lot. In my mirrors, the burning red glow of the flares lit up the crowd of miners still watching me. The man with my own face lifted one hand high. I couldn't tell if it was a farewell or a promise. And then, everything faded. The industrial lights dimmed. The machines fell silent. The figures dissolved into the dark. By the time my truck clawed its way back up the ridge, the valley behind me was nothing but silent forest. I glanced at the GPS. Startled, it now showed me right back on Interstate 77, as if I'd never taken the turn at all. But the clock on my dash told a harsher truth. I had lost 4 hours somewhere in those mountains. I rolled into Columbus 12 hours late, with no explanation I could give. If I told anyone what I'd seen, they'd write me off as delusional or worse, send me in for evaluation. But what still keeps me awake to this day is this. Every GPS I've checked since then still shows Route 19 alternate as a real road. And at truck stops, I still hear drivers talking about the new shortcut through West Virginia. Some swear it shaves time off their run, but others never make it to their destinations. And sometimes, on those long, lonely night drives, when I flip on my CB radio, through the static, I still hear the same voice calling out to me. Jake Morrison, your shift starts in 1 hour. Time to come home.
You're listening to Untold 365 Scary True Stories. If you enjoy this video, hit the like button, click subscribe, and comment the number 2 so we know you want more chilling stories.
My name is Tom Bradley. I've walked the Appalachian Trail for more than 15 years as a volunteer trail maintainer. I know every curve, every climb, every marker along the section I'm responsible for. For a long time, I believed I understood these mountains the way someone knows the layout of their own home. But everything changed, one October, on Section 12 of the Appalachian Trail in Virginia. In a stretch of ridges covered in white mist, beneath trees that blocked out the sky, I saw and heard things that should never exist in this world. That night, I learned a truth that chilled me to the bone. Humans are only guests in the ancient Appalachian Mountains. We come, we go, we think we leave our mark, but in reality, our presence is nothing more than footprints in sand, erased the moment the forest decides. And some guests, they stay too long, and they never come back. On the third night, I set up camp beside a strange stream. Its waters didn't flow downhill like every other stream I've known. Instead, it climbed upward over slick stones, defying gravity. When I shined my flashlight across the surface, it didn't reflect the familiar night sky of Virginia. Instead, it showed a foreign sky stars I'd never seen on any chart or map. I sat frozen, listening to the water whisper. And then, from the darkness across the bank, it appeared. Tall, thin, standing unnaturally straight. Its eyes glowed deep green, the color of forest shadows, and its skin looked gray and weathered, like old bark. It stepped closer without a sound, carrying with it a coldness that seeped into the air. Its voice cut through the silence, raspy yet firm, like wind scraping through dry leaves. You only work here with our permission. The campfire crackled, flames flickering across its face. My heart hammered, but my mind forced me to stand still and face it. When its voice faded, I noticed fresh white blazes had appeared on the trees ahead, marks that weren't on any maintenance schedule, that didn't match any map I carried. They cut through untracked forest, winding like an invitation, or more likely, a command. I understood then. This was a test. For 3 days and 3 nights, I was to follow those blazes, maintaining trails that didn't exist on any map. I had to clear brush, repair paths, and mark the routes, just as I would on the official Appalachian Trail, but this time, not for people. This time, it was to prove that I could show respect to an intelligence far older than humanity itself. This was no longer routine work. It was a brutal test. Every swing of my axe, every drop of sweat was being watched. It demanded more than trail skills. It demanded patience, humility, and the ability to accept that I was nothing more than a guest in these mountains. On the first day, the blazes led me to a clearing where the ground had split open into a massive chasm. I had walked this stretch dozens of times before, and I knew there had never been a fissure here. But now, a canyon yawned beneath me so deep that daylight couldn't even touch the bottom. On the edge sat a half-finished wooden bridge waiting for repair. I spent hours replacing planks, tightening bolts, and when I was done, the bridge stood solid and sturdy. Yet one thought haunted me. How could a canyon that never existed suddenly be here? On the second day, the blazes pulled me into a forest of giants. Towering trees stretched skyward, as if to pierce the clouds, bark thick and carpeted with moss. According to every record, this forest had been cut down centuries ago, before Europeans ever settled the region. But here it was alive, untouched, as if no blade had ever scarred it. On the third day, I painted blazes along paths no map had ever shown. They led me to places that defied all logic. A valley blazing with sunlight, even though dusk had already fallen, and a field of stone where my footsteps echoed half a beat late, as if sound itself was losing its way. I realized that every brushstroke, every swing of my tool, was marking trails that belonged to a parallel reality, one where the mountains preserved memories far beyond human understanding. Through all 3 days, I was never truly alone. Each time I bent to fasten a plank or painted a blaze on a tree, I could feel eyes on me from deep in the forest. No footsteps, no movement, just that crushing sensation on the back of my neck that wouldn't let me drop my guard for a second. I knew it was judging every move I made, not just my craftsmanship but my intent. Did I work sloppily? Did I harm the forest or treat it with care? Did I remain humble before a force older and greater than myself? Once, I paused, lifting my head toward the trees, and in a gap between the trunks, I caught a glimpse, a tall, thin figure, standing motionless, blended into bark, the color of ash, eyes glowing green in the shadows, staring straight at me, then gone in the blink of an eye. It didn't need to speak again. I understood. Everything I did was being recorded, and one day, it might be judged. I used to think my work was simple. Clear fallen trees, repair broken bridges, repaint blazes, just keeping the trail safe and visible for people passing through. But after 3 days in a forest no map had ever recorded, I began to understand. Trail maintenance has never been about imposing human will on nature. Every nail I hammered, every swing of the axe, every blaze I painted, it all felt like a conversation. Not between me and the trees, but between me and an ancient intelligence hidden within these mountains. Something older, wiser, and far greater than our species. I realized I was never the keeper of the trail. I thought I was. I was only a guest. A small, fragile guest trying to prove I had enough humility and respect to even lay a hand on these paths. It was no longer the mission of the Appalachian Trail Conservancy. It had become a delicate negotiation, where I could only hope my small efforts lined up with a far greater purpose the Appalachian Mountains have guarded since long before humans arrived. That night, while I was checking the fresh blazes I just painted, it appeared again. The tall, gaunt figure stood perfectly still between 2 trees, its green eyes reflecting the beam of my flashlight. Its voice scraped through the silence, brittle as wind through dry leaves. Your kind only walks where we allow. I gripped the handle of my axe tight, not to defend myself, but just to keep my hands from trembling. It slowly raised one long arm, pointing toward the new bridges and the gleaming blazes leading deeper into the woods. The trails you believe you're maintaining are only shadows of the true paths that run through these mountains. This lettered. In that moment, I understood. All the bridges I'd repaired, the cleared pathways, the bright white blazes, maybe they were nothing but a mask, an image the forest allowed humans to see. Behind it all were older, deeper, truer trails. I first began working the Appalachian Trail back in 2009. More than 15 years now, I've walked these paths not as a hiker, but as a keeper of the way. My work has always been solitary, quiet, and thankless. I replaced old blazes, painted new ones. I cleared trees after storms, cut back branches blocking the path. I set stone steps to prevent erosion, tightened planks on bridges so they could hold the weight of strangers' footsteps. Each day became a wordless conversation with the mountains. The ring of the axe, the bite of the saw, the scent of fresh-cut wood mixing with damp earth. No applause, no recognition. But for me, it was a quiet joy. I loved that work because in a modern world full of noise, I was doing something that truly mattered, even if no one noticed, keeping thousands of hikers safe, giving them the chance to touch the beauty of the Appalachians I had always thought of as a second home. I once believed I knew these trails as well as the lines of my own palm, but after that night, I realized there are paths here that were never meant to belong to people. It's something most hikers don't realize. Without the silent hands working behind the scenes, these trails would vanish after just a few seasons of storms and weather. Fallen trees would block the way, roots would heave up the soil into jagged steps, rain would carve channels, washing earth away until the trail became nothing but erosion gullies. Brush and weeds would swallow every sign that people had ever passed. Nature always takes back what it's lost, and all we, the maintainers, can do is hold back the inevitable for a little while longer. None of us truly owns these trails. All we do is delay what can't be stopped. Sooner or later, the forest takes everything back. But what I'll never forget is this. Sometimes, the forest doesn't just reclaim, it tests us. That October, a massive storm tore through central Virginia, leaving behind news reports of downed trees, landslides, and bridges washed out by floods. The Appalachian Trail Conservancy quickly divided the repair work among volunteers. My name was assigned to Section 12, a 5-mile stretch in the Blue Ridge Mountains. The report was clear. Multiple blockages, faded blazes, and at least one wooden bridge completely destroyed by high water. It was the kind of assignment I was used to, but one that demanded time and muscle. I knew I'd have to stay in the forest for several days, inspecting and repairing each site one by one. What I didn't know was that this post-storm maintenance trip would lead me into an experience that would change the rest of my life. That Saturday morning, I drove my old pickup to the trailhead. The bed was loaded with familiar tools: handsaw, axe, paintbrushes, and cans of white paint for refreshing blazes. I carried long planks for bridge work, along with a tent, sleeping bag, and enough dry food to last several days. I knew this trip wouldn't be finished in a single day. The damage reports were too extensive, so I decided I'd camp in the forest for the entire weekend instead of driving back and forth. It was the fastest way to get the work done, and I was already used to spending nights alone in the mountains. When the engine finally went quiet, I shouldered my pack and drew in a deep breath of the crisp October air. Ahead of me, the trail twisted through trees still wet from the storm, looking no different than on countless other maintenance trips. But I didn't know then that just a few steps forward would take me into territory no map had ever drawn. About an hour into the hike, I reached the first reported damage site. I braced myself for fallen trees, a washed-out bridge, and blazes faded by rain. Instead, I froze. The trail was perfect, impossibly perfect. Not a single branch blocked the way. The path was clean, smooth, as if freshly swept. The bridge that had supposedly been destroyed wasn't just intact, it looked brand new. The wood gleamed, unstained by weather, the bolts still shining. The entire structure looked like it had been built within the last week. I pulled out my GPS and compared it with the maintenance maps I'd carried for years. This was the right spot. I knew every landmark here, every rock, every stump. There was no mistaking it. Yet instead of wreckage, everything was cleaner and newer than the last time I'd serviced it myself. My first feeling wasn't relief. It was a crawling unease. If it wasn't me, then who had done this work? And how had it been done so fast beyond what should be possible? I pushed deeper, checking the next sites on my list, and the pattern repeated again and again. Every fallen tree I expected had already been cut and hauled off. Washouts had been reinforced with carefully laid stone steps, so exact that not a single rock was out of place. Fresh white blazes stood out bright against the bark, perfectly aligned, paint still looking wet. Everything was too clean, too precise, too flawless. No rough saw marks, no leftover splinters. The work surpassed even the strictest standards of the Appalachian Trail Conservancy. I stopped in the middle of the path, a chill running down my back despite the cold air. Someone or something had done the maintenance before me. But what made my chest tighten was this. There was no reason I wouldn't have been told. This wasn't coincidence. It was a message. At the third repair site, I froze. Right off the trail, beneath the heavy canopy, something sent a chill straight through me. A full set of trail maintenance tools was laid out in a perfect line on the ground. Brush cutter, pruning shears, paintbrushes, measuring sticks. Every piece sat parallel, balanced with a precision so exact it looked as if someone had measured it down to the inch. But what held my eyes wasn't the arrangement, it was the tools themselves. They were old-fashioned designs, models that had been outdated for decades. I recognized one that looked exactly like something I'd seen in black and white photos from the 1,950 seconds. And yet, they showed no signs of age, no rust, no dull edges. The wooden handles gleamed as if freshly oiled. Old, but brand new. I stepped closer, heartbeat quickening. The way they were arranged perfectly straight, deliberate, precise, wasn't random. This was intentional, like someone wanted me to see them, to understand that a crew had been here before me, a crew that wasn't entirely human. I swallowed hard, lifting my eyes to the silent forest around me. For the first time in 15 years of trail work, I realized I wasn't alone. Drawing a shaky breath, I called out, forcing my voice to stay steady. "Hello? Is someone here? Are these your tools?" My words bounced off the ridges and died. 1 second. 2. 5. No response. The silence was absolute. No birdsong, no rustling leaves, not even the faint breeze that always whispers through the Appalachians. Only the hammering of my own heartbeat and the rough sound of my breath coming back to me. It wasn't natural silence. It was heavy, pressed down on every branch, every stone, as if the entire forest had stopped breathing, waiting. My hand clenched around the flashlight in my pack. For the first time in all my years of maintenance, I didn't feel like a steward of the trail. I felt like an intruder. I forced myself onward, trying to focus on my task, but my eyes kept drifting to the wrong details. Fresh white blazes marks that should only exist on scheduled sections were now glowing on trees my map said had no reason to be marked. They stood out, almost too bright in the shadows, as if they'd been painted the night before. Worse, some of the blazes didn't follow the main Appalachian Trail at all. Instead, They veered off to the side, stretching into narrow, shadowed side paths I had never seen in over a decade of working here. I stopped, checking both my printed maps and GPS data. There were no side trails in this area. None. These painted marks weren't just out of place, they were leading me to places that didn't exist on any map. I swallowed hard. In that moment, it hit me. Someone, or something, was redrawing the trail in its own design. As I moved deeper, I started paying closer attention to the ground, still soft from the storm. That's when I saw the thing that froze my blood. Footprints. A line pressed clean into the mud, the tread sharp and fresh, as if stamped just seconds earlier. But after a few steps, the trail of prints stopped dead mid-stride, as if the one who made them had simply vanished. No turnaround marks, no fading impressions. They just ended in nothing. And then, a few yards away, another set started from nowhere. No lead-in tracks, no origin. They just appeared out of the earth, walked on for a few steps, and then faded again. I crouched to study them closer. Same size, same tread pattern, all belonging to one person or one thing. But the spacing was wrong. Some steps were unnaturally close, almost on top of each other. Others were impossibly far apart, no human stride could cover that distance. These weren't ordinary footprints. They felt like the impressions of something caught half in my world, half somewhere else. I stood frozen for a long time, the hair on my neck prickling, convinced that at any second the owner of those tracks might step out of thin air right in front of me. By late afternoon, as the sun sank behind the Blue Ridge, I sat down on a rock and seriously considered quitting. 15 years of trail work, I'd faced blizzards, flash floods, brutal heat that drained every ounce of strength. But never once had I felt the forest itself watching me. Every footstep weighed, judged. My rational mind screamed, "Get back to the truck. Get out while you still can." But another part of me held fast. I had driven 4 hours to get here. I had an assignment to finish, and there were still reports waiting to be verified. In the end, I chose to set up camp at an official site, nearly 10 miles from the trailhead. I lit a fire, laid out my gear, and told myself it could all be coincidence. Faulty reports, tools left behind by someone else, misplaced blazes. But when night swallowed the forest, unease crept through every muscle. I knew I wasn't alone. Around midnight, I jolted awake. At first, I thought it was just wind tugging at the tarp of my tent, but then my ears picked up familiar rhythms. Thok, thok, thok. The sound of an axe splitting wood. Scrape, grind, steel biting into stone. Rustle, snap, crackle. Branches being dragged off a trail. I knew those sounds. I'd heard them for 15 years of trail work. But here, they weren't coming from one person, or even a small group. They were coming from every direction at once. The entire Appalachian forest had become a massive worksite at midnight. The chopping, the scraping, the clearing blended into a strange, haunting rhythm. No lights, no figures, just the steady echo of an invisible crew working without rest in the darkness. I sat bolt upright in my tent, cold sweat sliding down my back even as the campfire outside still burned low. And one thought gripped me. These sounds weren't meant for me, but somehow, the forest had let me hear them. I couldn't stay still. My hands shook as I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, beam cutting across the towering trunks. My heart pounded as I headed toward the direction of the noise. The moment I crossed the edge of camp, everything stopped. No axe, no dragging stone, no snapping branches, only the hiss of cold wind through dry leaves and the crunch of my own boots in the damp soil. I spun the light in wide arcs, sweeping the thick shadows. Trees loomed above me, undergrowth nodded at my feet, but nothing moved. Nothing was there, only silence, heavy and absolute, as if the forest had never made a sound at all. I forced myself back to camp, telling my racing thoughts I was just exhausted. But when my flashlight beam slid across the tent, my stomach dropped. My tools, the axe, saw, paintbrushes, measuring sticks, were no longer packed in the bag where I'd left them. They'd been laid out neatly on the ground outside, lined up with surgical precision, each one spaced evenly apart, as if measured with a ruler. Exactly the way I'd seen that mysterious set of tools earlier in the day. My body locked up. This wasn't imagination. Someone, or something, had touched my gear, and it wanted me to know it. When dawn broke through the canopy, I stepped out of my tent with heavy eyes after a sleepless night. But what I saw next made me forget my exhaustion almost instantly. The trail had changed. Right in front of me, where the night before there had been nothing but rough ground, now stood a wooden bridge, sturdy, polished, gleaming, as if freshly built. Not far away, a perfect set of stone steps climbed a slope that had once been slick and dangerous. On the trees lining both sides, fresh white blazes glared bright and straight, guiding hikers away from the official Appalachian Trail and deeper into the forest's shadows. I stepped closer, hand brushing against the rail of the bridge. The wood still carried the smell of sap. The bolts were tight, every detail flawless. There was no way any human crew could have built this overnight. The work was so perfect, it bordered on the unreal. And that perfection made my skin crawl. I stood frozen, heartbeat thundering, as one truth sank in. Whoever or whatever had worked through the night to build this hadn't done it for people. I turned, and it was there, tall, gaunt, motionless, as if it had grown out of the trunk behind me. Its skin was gray, rough like the bark of an ancient tree. Its eyes were deep green, glowing with the color of forest shadows where light never reached. My breath caught, but I forced myself to speak. This is my section. I've maintained it for 15 years. It tilted its head, studying me, then answered in a rasping voice like wind tearing through dry leaves. These trails are older than your kind. We keep them for purposes you cannot understand. My chest hammered. The new bridges, the glowing blazes, the hidden paths that no map recorded, none of them were for hikers. They were part of something larger, older, far beyond my comprehension. I stood in silence, not knowing how to respond. But in those green eyes, I read a truth colder than the morning air. I was only here because the mountains allowed it, and if one day they chose to withdraw that permission, I knew I would vanish, just like those footprints that had ended in nothing. I'm Chris Morgan, and before I dive into the story, I need you to remember one thing. If one day you're scrolling online and see a posting for a fire lookout job offering pay that seems way too good, describing work that sounds as simple as sitting alone in a tower, watching the skies and the quiet forest stop, think twice before you apply. Because some towers, like the one I was sent to, should have stayed abandoned forever. When I say this, I'm not trying to scare you for the sake of it. I say it because I was there. I lived it, breathed it, and witnessed things no science class could ever explain, and a part of me wishes I had never set foot inside that tower. Even now, after escaping Tower 47, I still feel the weight of the mountains pressing on my chest. I've decided to tell it all not to ask for sympathy, but as a warning. Back then, I was 21, just a college student barely scraping together tuition for my senior year. I wasn't anything special, no soldier, no scientist, just a kid who thought he was tough enough to handle being alone. I figured a fire lookout job would be the perfect summer gig. A few quiet months, gazing out at endless ridgelines, reading, studying, checking in on the weather by radio. But I was wrong. I was wrong from the very moment I signed my name on that contract. And that mistake threw me into the center of an experience so heavy that even now, when I close my eyes, I still hear the crackle of radio static mixed with the wind in the trees, like voices from the past, still whispering between two worlds. I remember exactly the day I saw the posting pinned on the university job board. Just a small slip of paper, plain black text. But the numbers on it made me reread it over and over, just to be sure I wasn't imagining it. The pay was double what my friends were making that summer. While they were sweating through restaurant shifts, or standing on their feet in retail for minimum wage, this job promised something else entirely. Manning a tower, scanning the forest, checking in only when needed. No angry customers, no noisy night shifts, just isolation, just silence. For a student worn thin after 3 years of crammed dorm life, blasting stereos, and careless roommates, the offer felt like a gift. I pictured myself studying in peace, watching the sunset through wide glass windows, and letting the wilderness wrap around me. I thought it was perfect. But sometimes, when something looks like a perfect bargain, it's because it hides a cost you'll never be ready to pay. The interview itself was over so quickly I almost laughed at how casual it seemed. The office at the Forest Service was small, smelling of old wood and damp paper. The man across from me introduced himself as Henderson, the district supervisor. He didn't ask me about my grades, or where I had worked before. Instead, he locked eyes with me, his voice slow, deliberate, almost probing. How well can you handle isolation? Ever worked with shortwave radio before? Have you ever experienced anything unusual while out in nature? Each question sent a chill through me. At first, I thought it was just a psychological screening, maybe checking if I could handle stress. But the way Henderson's eyes fixed on me, aged, cold, like they had already seen too much, made me feel as if he was testing me for something far heavier than I realized. Finally, he slid a thin sheet of paper across the desk. It held only a few words. Tower 47, Pisgah National Forest. No photos, no detailed description, just a number and a name. From there, it's a 4-hour hike. He said, be ready to be alone longer than you've ever imagined. And remember, not everyone is cut out for this job. I nodded. Back then, I had no idea I had just agreed to a sentence no one had warned me about. I set out the next morning, the air heavy and humid, my pack weighing me down. The trail stretched on for over 4 hours, and soon my body was drenched in sweat, my breath echoing ragged against the empty mountainside. The path twisted higher and higher, switchback after switchback. Each stretch looked like a different world. Dense, dark pine forest, one moment, bare, rocky slopes the next, where the wind howled like a living thing. The higher I climbed, the thinner the air became, and I started to feel as though I was being swallowed by a place that didn't want me there. By the time the sun dipped low in the west, I finally saw it. Tower 47, a narrow frame of steel rising out of the forest, holding a small cabin nearly 60 feet, about 18 meters above the ground. It stood alone, like a giant, unblinking eye. The windows wrapped around all four sides, catching the red of the setting sun, making the entire tower glow like an iron torch burning against the ridgeline. I stopped at the base of the staircase, staring up. The wind whistled through the metal, each step groaning as if it hadn't been touched in decades. A shiver ran down my spine, something caught between the thrill of discovery and a creeping unease I couldn't name. I drew in a deep breath, set my foot on the first step, and began climbing toward the place that would change my life forever. When the steel door closed behind me with a hollow clang, I immediately realized the cabin wasn't empty. The small space, barely big enough for a cot, a desk, a radio, and an old stove, still carried traces of someone's life, as if whoever had lived here hadn't left by choice, but in a hurry. A jacket hung loosely on a metal hook, its shoulders still holding shape under a thick layer of dust. In the corner, a pair of hiking boots rested by the door, as if their owner might return at any moment to slip them on. Even the ceramic mug on the desk still held a dark liquid that had long since turned to mold, giving off a damp, sour smell. I opened the small refrigerator. Its weak yellow light flickered over a few containers of food, frozen solid with age. The unease crept in deeper. Everything here felt like it had been frozen in time, abandoned in a single moment decades ago. On the desk, next to the radio, I found a weathered journal. The cover was worn, the pages yellowed, but the handwriting was still clear. I flipped to the last entry, dated August 15th, 1987. Strange lights in Sector 7 again. Weather clear. Visibility excellent. Something is definitely out there. Mere Patterson. Hooer. I read it again and again. That date was just 3 days before Tower 47 was supposedly shut down for good. My pulse quickened, my grip tightening on the journal. Standing 60 feet above the forest in that silent cabin, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, something, was still watching every move I made. Right after finishing Patterson's final words, I decided to check in over the radio. The device crackled to life, static snapping through the cabin like cold wind running down my spine. "I'm at Tower 47, I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. "There are belongings from the previous lookout still here. What do you want me to do with them?" Silence for a few seconds. Then, a woman's voice came through. Her accent was hard to place. Not southern, not northern, but the confusion in her tone was unmistakable. "Tower 47? That site's been closed for decades. Are you sure you've got the right coordinates? There shouldn't be a tower there at all." "There." They were to the zenith. I gripped the mic tighter, eyes scanning the empty cabin around me, my heartbeat hammering. "I'm standing inside it right now. I was officially assigned here. This is Tower 47. The line suddenly broke with harsh static, as though someone else was pushing into the frequency. And then Henderson's voice cut through, rough and distorted, dragged across the interference. "Forget it." Patterson was eccentric. "Just focus on your assignment. Observe. Report any fire activity you see." In class, I opened my mouth to press him further, but the transmission faded, collapsing into nothing but sharp, empty static. The cabin seemed colder all at once, shadows stretching longer across the wooden floor. The weak lamp on the desk cast a pale glow onto the old journal, the words of Patterson staring back at me like a warning. Henderson's response had been final, but deep inside, something else had already taken root, an unease I knew would never leave me. The first days at Tower 47 passed in a slow, almost mechanical rhythm. I woke early, recorded the weather temperature, wind direction, visibility. Every hour I swept the forest with binoculars and checked in with dispatch. At night I filed my final report, then sat at the desk, opened my books, and tried to study for my senior year. The only sounds around me were the wind pressing against the windows, the restless whisper of leaves in the canopy, and now and then the groan of metal from the tower's 60-foot frame. At night, the cabin turned into a small island of light, floating in a sea of black. I'd sit at the desk, the lamp's yellow glow spilling over the pages, while outside the world shrank to faint outlines of ridges under the moon. That silence at first gave me an odd kind of comfort. No crowded dorms, no city noise. Just me, completely alone, with a sky full of stars hanging beyond the glass. But there was something I didn't notice right away. In that absolute quiet, even the smallest sounds carried like whispers, and as I settled into the routine, a question began gnawing at me. Was I really the only one on this tower? One evening, with the sun sinking low in the west, I lifted my binoculars for a routine sweep. From up high, the view stretched forever, mountains stacked against mountains, valleys drowned in green. Everything seemed still. Then I saw them. Out in a stretch of forest with no trail, no path figures appeared. They didn't stumble like hikers, and they didn't follow slopes like hunters. They moved in perfect straight lines, cutting across steep terrain, gliding past roots and rock faces without slowing. I lowered the binoculars, squinted with my own eyes, nothing. When I lifted them again, the figures were farther along, moving at a speed no person could manage. Their motion was smooth, uninterrupted, like shadows programmed to slide through the landscape. My pulse hammered. Sweat beaded on my palms, slipping against the binoculars as I tried to follow them. For a few seconds I kept them in view then, in a blink, the entire group was gone. No trace, no sound. Just the forest, still and endless, washed in the red glow of sunset. I froze, a chill rippling through me. It felt like I had just glimpsed another layer of reality bleeding into mine. Logic whispered, maybe an illusion, a trick of the light. But deep down, I knew what I saw wasn't part of the normal world. That night, I sat at the radio as usual, reporting weather and observations. When the check-in was done, I left the unit on. Static filled the cabin, hissing softly like an endless breath in the dark. Then suddenly, a voice cut through the static. Clear, steady, professional. Tower 23 to dispatch. Visibility 8 miles. Wind southwest at 15 knots. Unusual fire activity in Sector 12. Flames moving uphill against the wind. I froze. Tower 23 had been demolished years ago. Before I could process it, another voice broke in a man's voice. Rough and worn, carrying fatigue, but still calm and precise. Tower 8 reporting. Day 127 of continuous duty. Still no relief. The watchers in the forest are getting closer to the tower base, requesting immediate support. I gripped the mic tighter, ready to respond, but the frequency twisted into heavy distortion, like someone was physically wrenching the signal apart. These transmissions weren't recordings. I could hear the breaths between words, the edge of fear straining their voices. I remembered Henderson once saying this was just a mountain echo effect, a quirk of radio waves bouncing in rough terrain. But sitting there in that dim cabin, the yellow lamp buzzing, the steel frame groaning under the wind, and voices from towers long gone whispering, as if right next to my ear I knew better. These weren't echoes from the past. They were live reports, from places I couldn't see. I had been at Tower 47 for just over a week when I stumbled onto the hidden door. One late afternoon, while shifting a bookcase pressed against the wooden wall, I noticed it sat slightly off-center. A faint line of light bled through the crack. My heart pounded as I shoved the bookcase aside. Behind it was a thin iron door, its lock rusted solid. I pushed hard, and the hinges screamed open with a metallic shriek that seemed to tear through the silence. Inside wasn't storage. The ceiling bulb flickered, casting a sickly yellow light over a room lined with equipment. Cameras fitted with massive telephoto lenses, reel-to-reel recorders, shelves stacked with tapes, and hundreds of photographs pinned across the walls. The air was heavy with the smell of old paper and rusting metal. My hands trembled as I picked up one of the photos. In the image, just beyond the tree line, were tall, thin figures, skin a dull gray, their movements unnaturally fluid. Some stood perfectly still at the forest's edge, eyes fixed directly on the tower, as if waiting. And then I found the photo that drained the blood from my face. It was taken from outside the cabin window. The frame showed me, asleep on the narrow cot, blanket pulled up to my chest. But beside the bed, leaning in close, was one of the figures, its face smooth and featureless, its eyes dark voids reflecting the glow of the lamp. Scrawled on the edge of the print was a date. 2 nights earlier. My fingers shook so badly the photo nearly slipped from my hand. In that moment, one truth slammed into me, undeniable and cold. I was not alone in this tower, and maybe no one ever had been. I was still frozen, the picture trembling between my fingers, when a chill swept down my spine. The hinges on the door behind me gave a slow, grinding creak. I turned, and there it was, standing in the doorway of the hidden room. It was impossibly tall, its frame so thin that bones jutted beneath skin the color of ash. But what stopped my heart was the way its joints bent wrong, unnatural, defying every rule of human anatomy. Shoulders pitched back too far, elbows twisted outward, legs long and spindly, built to stride over terrain no human could cross. Its face was smooth, blank, with no mouth, no nose, only 2 hollow eyes, black and deep, reflecting the weak yellow light from the ceiling bulb. Looking at it felt like staring into a dark mirror that swallowed every trace of light. And then a voice rang out, not through my ears, but inside my head. A cold, resonant whisper that seemed to shake through my skull. You're doing the same work Patterson did. Richardson before him. Thompson before that. They all came to understand the truth. And now, it's your turn. I stumbled backward, my foot catching the edge of the desk, heart slamming against my ribs like it was trying to break free. No sound came from its face, but the words poured straight into my mind. Undeniable. Inescapable. In that instant, I realized Patterson hadn't been eccentric like Henderson claimed. Richardson and Thompson weren't just names buried in old records. They were still here, bound to this place, tied to whatever now stood in front of me. And I had just been pulled into that same chain. It didn't move closer. It just stood tall in the doorway, its thin frame looming, those black eyes catching the lamp's flicker. And again, the voice filled my head, each word sharp, metallic, and cold. Tower 47 was never about watching for fires. It exists to guard the boundary between your world and ours. I swallowed hard, both hands gripping the edge of the desk to steady myself. Someone, it said, has to watch the watchers. This is now. The room around me, the massive telephoto lenses, the stacks of reels, the hundreds of photographs suddenly made perfect sense. This wasn't a fire lookout. It was an interdimensional observation post, where humans were nothing more than small links in a much larger chain of surveillance. The voice kept going, steady and emotionless, like a slow, methodical report. The lookouts before you understood this. And they chose to stay. Patterson, Richardson, Thompson. One by one, they accepted their role. The air seemed to thicken, pressing in around me. The space felt smaller, heavier, as if those names weren't just memories but presences, shadows still lingering in the room. The lookouts had never really left. I was starting to understand, but with that understanding came a surge of fear that nearly broke me. Because if they had chosen to stay, then the question became inescapable. What choice would I have? Before I could gather my thoughts, the radio on the desk burst to life. The indicator lights flashed wildly, and the static swelled into a tangled chorus of voices, layered on top of each other, shaking the cramped cabin walls. I heard dozens of them, men and women, old and young, all speaking the same language, each voice carrying the rhythm of a professional report. But what they were saying belonged to no world I knew. Tower 12, visibility clear. Fire activity spreading in the gaps between layers of space. Flames are crossing the border of reality. Tower 19 reporting. Entities moving through the forest of probability. Speed unmeasurable. Direction does not match any map. Tower 31, abnormal weather. Pressure forming in the space between thoughts. I sat frozen, eyes locked on the radio. One voice after another flowed through, as if the entire network of towers was still active, but not in my dimension. These weren't recordings. They were alive, urgent, responding to one another. I could hear quick breaths, the rush of wind through their mics, and at times, dead pauses, suffocating silence, like the speaker was staring directly at something right in front of them. Logic whispered explanations, signal bounce, overlapping frequencies, mountain interference. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was listening to ongoing shifts, still happening, at towers that in our world had long since been erased. When the voices finally faded, the cabin sank back into a crushing silence. The tall, thin figure still stood unmoving in the doorway, its black eyes reflecting the flicker of the weak yellow lamp, deep and endless as twin voids. Its voice echoed in my head again, this time slow, deliberate, like a verdict being handed down. You can join them, or you can leave. But if you leave, this boundary will go unwatched. No one will see the incursions. Your world will drift into ours, until there is no difference at all. The room seemed to drop a few degrees colder, and I could feel my heartbeat slamming inside my chest. I thought of my final year of college waiting for me, of the ordinary plans I had, graduation, a steady job, the safe life I had always assumed was ahead. But then, I thought of the photographs covering the walls, the tall, gray figures lingering in the forest, the voices from towers long gone that still called in through the static. All of it crashed together in my mind, and I realized I was sitting right at the fault line, holding a responsibility I had never asked for. Part of me wanted to run, slam the door shut, and abandon it all, but another part screamed louder. If this boundary really was what stood between two worlds, did I even have the right to turn my back? In the suffocating silence, the truth became clear. The choice wasn't as simple as stay or go. The choice came with a price I couldn't yet imagine. In my panic, I remembered the emergency protocol. Every lookout carried a satellite beacon, meant only for life or death situations. My hand shaking, I pulled it from my pack, my fingers slick with sweat as it hovered over the red button. The device flared to life, its light blinking fast, and I knew the distress call was being transmitted straight to headquarters. For a brief moment, I believed I was about to be saved. Then the radio crackled violently, and a familiar voice came through. Rescue team has received your signal, but we can't locate you. According to records, Tower 47 doesn't exist. The coordinates you sent marked nothing but empty wilderness. I went numb. The tiny room spun, my chest tightening with each heavy heartbeat. I screamed into the mic, voice breaking. I'm here. I can see the tower. I'm inside it. You have to come. The signal warped again, then collapsed into silence. Behind me, the cold voice slid back into my skull, deep and metallic, like steel grinding over bone. Tower 47 exists between dimensions. Your rescue team operates in only one. They will never reach you, unless you choose to return to their reality. I clutched the beacon, its small red light blinking hopelessly against the damp wooden wall, and in that moment, I understood. I wasn't just trapped on a mountain. I was trapped in a place that belonged to no single world at all. The next 3 days, I lived suspended between hope and despair. Each morning, I still carried out my observations, logged the weather, scanned the forest through my binoculars like some machine running a program on repeat. I kept reporting over the radio, even though I knew no one on the other side was really listening. The tall figure never left. It didn't come closer, but it never went away either. Sometimes it stood motionless at the edge of the hidden room. Other times, I'd see it at the base of the tower, its dark eyes glinting like mirrors in the light. It never raised a hand against me, but every time I saw it, the weight of its presence pressed against me until I could hardly breathe. And then its voice would seep into my head again, steady, patient, like some grim teacher lecturing a stubborn student. If you abandon this place, the boundary will be left unguarded. Those outside will cross. The two worlds will blend until no difference remains. I tried to ignore it. I tried to bury myself in numbers, in weather logs, in routines. But at night, when the wind screamed through the steel frame, when the radio suddenly coughed out faint bursts of static, I couldn't block out its words. And I asked myself, if I walked away, would there be anyone else to take my place? 3 days dragged on like 30 years. I no longer knew what was duty and what was a trap. The only truth that clung to me was this: every lookout before me had stayed. And maybe I was expected to do the same. On the 4th day, the sky turned black. Storm clouds piled over Pisgah, thunder rolling so loud it shook the tower itself. I stood inside the cabin, watching lightning carve across the mountains, white light flooding through the windows, turning the tiny room into a flickering box. And then it happened. A strike hit somewhere near the base of the tower. The entire frame shuddered, the sound like a colossal piece of metal bending in half. For one heartbeat, all the layers, all the warped images of the forest vanished. For the first time in days, the world outside appeared as it truly was. Thick green woods, wet earth, raw stone. No tall watchers, no impossible geometry, no illusions twisting reality. My heart exploded in my chest. I knew instantly. The storm had pulled Tower 47 back into my world, and if I was ever going to escape, this was the moment. I didn't think. I grabbed my pack, stuffed my notebook and flashlight inside, and tore for the door. The stairwell was slick with rain, every step clanging under my boots as thunder roared overhead. I nearly slipped more than once, gripping the freezing rail to keep from falling. Behind me, the wind screamed through the cabin, and beneath the pounding rain, I heard them. Voices calling my name. Not one voice, but many. Patterson, Richardson, Thompson, and the entity itself. All of them, together, merging into a chilling chorus. Chris. Morgan. Chris. Morgan. I didn't dare look back. I flew down the stairs, splashed across the soaked ground, and started to run. Rain lashed my face. Thunder cracked directly overhead, but only one thought burned in my mind. I had to get away from that tower before it vanished again. I tore down the trail, boots sinking deep into mud, lungs heaving so hard it felt like my chest would tear open. Rain hammered the canopy, thunder boomed through the ridges, but beneath all that natural chaos, I still heard them. Voices, drawn out and overlapping, echoing just behind me. Patterson, Richardson, Thompson, and the cold, resonant tone of the entity. Each name, each call, clung to the back of my neck like invisible hands trying to drag me around. I kept my head down, refused to turn. But even without looking, I could feel it, Tower 47, shifting behind me. A flash of lightning lit up the storm, and for the briefest instant I saw it. The steel frame shuddering, its massive structure trembling, then fading, swallowed whole by the storm itself. I stumbled, knees slamming into the wet earth. Forcing myself up, I turned once, just once, and it was gone. No tower, only the dark forest, silent and dripping, rain falling into empty space where it had once stood. The storm began to break. Wind calmed. Thunder rolled off into the distance. I lay there in the mud, drenched, chest pounding like it would explode. And in that heavy stillness of the mountain, I realized I had escaped, but also knew some part of it had followed me, forever. When I finally made it back down to the lowlands, I tried to report everything. I gave coordinates, described the tower, even handed over Patterson's journal, but the response froze me to the core. No record existed of Tower 47. In the official files, the tower had never stood. No reactivation orders, no mention of me on their payroll, as if the job and the weeks I spent there had never happened at all. I never took another lookout job. But even now, on certain nights, I switch on my old radio, and in the hiss of static, I still hear them voices from towers that should no longer exist. Patterson, Richardson, Thompson, others I don't even know, still checking in, still reporting fires no one else can see, still describing movement between layers of reality. And me? I chose an ordinary life, a single, grounded world. But when I stand at the foot of those mountains, staring at the dark ridges drowned in mist, I can't shake the feeling that the mountains are always watching us, and someone will always have to watch back. I'm just not that person anymore.